It's so close that we can practically taste it, so let's talk about the Switch 2 Direct. I had planned to do this a little sooner, but of course, events over the last week have interceded, and I'm more pressed for time than I anticipated. On the other hand, I have talked extensively about different aspects of Switch 2's likely future before, so this video won't deep dive any specific topics, but it will just be a general discussion around aspects that we could see. First of all, let's talk the amount of time that will be utilized showcasing the system as opposed to simply games. Because while it is going to be a games console, it is also a Nintendo system, and we know that there are going to be specific features that Nintendo will want to convey to the public. The mouse mode and the C button at minimum will be discussed, but also the interface remains something that has yet to be revealed. With the Switch, they went as minimalist as they could for fear of repeating loading errors on the Wii U, and I think that broadly worked for them. Still, they have had time to design an interface for Switch 2 that is a little different, and we saw a preview of this with the launch of virtual game cards. These, on one level, solve a pragmatic issue with digital downloads, but there's also a greater tactility and flexibility with being able to move these virtual cards from place to place. And I could see something similar being adopted in the general aesthetic and approach of the Switch 2 interface, focusing on virtual equivalents to more tactile types of experience. Some things that strike me as plausible, easy wins include incorporating background music through integrating the Nintendo Music app, a bit like turning on a jukebox in the background. If it can run on smartphones, it seems an odd oversight that it doesn't run on your base Switch when even Smash Bros. Ultimate can have the Switch's screen off and still play music through the Switch. Themes is another popular request, and here I'm slightly more skeptical. On the one hand, it is fruit so low hanging that muddy moles run off with it. I also think it fits with where Nintendo is at present. Nintendo today has themes prominently centered around their primary franchises, and I think this is the kind of direction that they may wish to go. Anything that encourages people to identify with their specific kinds of branding. On the other hand, this also feels like the kind of thing that could be rolled out gradually, with new themes being the kind of exciting yet low-key event that could be a great trail of breadcrumbs for Nintendo today. Low-key announcements that nevertheless fill a news slot. And I do think Nintendo today will have a big impact on the way announcements are going to be working in the next few months. Sure, Nintendo would do the odd social media drop before, but generally we've seen their approach was to cluster news together into their directs. But the app rewards a far more gradual pace of revelations. We've already seen them build up a larger number of initiatives, which suits relatively frequent reveals. Game drops on NSO, music drops on Nintendo Music, game events in some of their evergreens, and so this just adds to the list. What I don't necessarily expect is a full integration with Nintendo today on the actual hardware. It might seem obvious to incorporate the calendar functionality into the Switch 2. After all, where else should Nintendo share their news but on their system? And it may well happen, but if you think about what the app is trying to achieve, there's a reason for them to pump the brakes. They want people to be connected to Nintendo 24/7 in their personal lives. People could already get news on the regular through the Switch news service, but clearly Nintendo today scratches a different itch. If they make it too easy for people to access news and features purely through the system, it risks people feeling like the app is superfluous. Don't get me wrong, I would vastly prefer it if the app were on the Switch itself, and it could still happen, but I definitely have my reservations on that front. It strikes me that they will need to spend a few minutes talking through the interface and innovations, and then they will also need to explicate the mouse and C button features. So many options for the C button have been discussed, from a social media function to a cast mode to activate a kind of Wii U functionality to simply an additional programmable button. I'm not necessarily persuaded that any of these options is more likely than the other, and to be honest, I'm happy to just sit back and be surprised, since almost any option is a low individual likelihood. That extra USB port, though, is going to be particularly interesting to me, and if they're planning to use it to bolt things on, you would expect there to be at least one example of something to be added on at launch. Likely a camera, I guess, but perhaps something else. I think we can bet that they will spend a lot of time on the aesthetics, including, of course, the Joy-Con colors. The original Switch had two different Joy-Con color options in the launch models, as did the Switch OLED, and I think it's likely that they will go down the same route here. It seems logical that existing Joy-Con could be utilized with Switch 2, albeit perhaps with limitations. For a title of the style of Everybody Want to Switch, it makes perfect sense to permit existing Joy-Con to be used, because they will want as many people as possible to be joining in a massive multiplayer game. For bigger deal titles, including new Mario Party entries, they may see these games as vehicles to actually sell new Joy-Con, and so they may be more withholding about whether the Switch 1 Joy-Con work with the new system. But I do expect the feature of being able to utilize old Joy-Con to be confirmed as an option, although perhaps not in this specific Direct. The final set of features they will want to demonstrate are those features geared towards NSO subscribers. I noticed that my copy of Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition had a bit of paper tucked in offering online membership, and as I've said many times, that Nintendo will want to turbocharge their focus on this service in order to help them bridge the console tradition. Of course, the last video I did that focused on this was literally days before they announced early access eligibility to purchase Alamo and a playtest, both for Nintendo Switch Online subscribers. It is clearly something they've made a lot of strides towards, but I think they could still potentially go further. Of course, Nintendo Switch Online is also quite fully featured, so what they could do is announce a price uplift, but potentially say that people can pre-renew at the current price if they do so sooner. This has several potential positive consequences for Nintendo. For one thing, it would bring forward renewal dates and give Nintendo a bit of an injection of cash at the start of a fiscal quarter, where potentially they're months away from having anything to sell. Second of all, it would fix a lot of renewal dates to April, which means that they will also renew around the time of maximum hype for Mario in 2026 and maximum hype for Zelda in 2027, and if it seems likely 2028 takes us into new Animal Crossing territory, then this makes it all the more likely that people will keep renewing in that year as well. But to bring forward renewal dates probably requires more than just a financial incentive. Therefore, I could see a rejigging of the console offerings. The obvious change would be to move one of the consoles to the base tier, probably the Sega Mega Drive or Genesis, but perhaps also the N64, and then add to the expansion pack. And if they do add to the expansion pack, the only one that would really make sense to me at this point is the Nintendo DS. The DS wouldn't be as memory intensive to emulate as the GameCube would be, and the GameCube's libraries of games include far more that would make tempting ports or remakes. But also, the mouse mode functionality would probably be a reasonable approximation for touchscreen play, and if, as seems decently possible, the system can cast to a screen, creating a double screen experience, then it would be the perfect time to model it. I wonder even whether they could have a way to do portable play, where you could have a Switch 1 console as the DS controller and use the DS in tabletop mode as the equivalent of the DS's top screen, or of course just use that top USB to chuck in an extra screen. A bit cumbersome perhaps, it would probably work better if they can just find a way to make the Switch 2 playable vertically, and this would be a good move also, given the increasing popularity of this aspect ratio in the TikTok era, so I certainly wouldn't rule it out. Either way, it's impossible to imagine that they've gone all this time without game planning how to make DS work on Switch 2, and if they have a solution, they may as well show it at launch. It gives them the best excuse that they're going to get for a price bump. They could even sweeten the deal with another DLC pack. It might be a bit early for Splatoon 3 DLC to make the service, but maybe a couple of more niche offerings, such as Torn of the Golden Country, or the expansion pass for one of the Fire Emblems, probably Engage, since it might prompt sales of that criminally underrated game. It seems plausible that NSO membership could even be rebranded, although, as one razor-sharp commenter pointed out, it probably won't be Nintendo Online, which has a rather forbidding acronym. At the very least, I can see them integrating it into the core system interface far more. I don't think Nintendo will ever go down the route of achievements, but it feels plausible to me that they could do their own take on the same broad principle, perhaps a stamp book that you can work together with other people to complete. And there's one major way that NSO could become particularly important. The chance to purchase Switch 2 being offered to NSO members first seems like a plausible and even sensible way to stagger out game sales. I think the Nintendo Today app actually gives them a lot more leeway in terms of how they could manage this. They could offer particular people short windows to order their systems if and when they wish. For example, they could have people register interest in Switch 2 and receive a code to use and perhaps a particular color alongside. Then Nintendo Today could highlight to people when people with particular color tokens can log in to make their purchase. This should stop the stampede of everybody trying to log in at once and give them good advance notice of their fulfillment requirements. For the actual purchasing, which needs to be as smooth as butter, crashes would be very bad indeed when potentially buying a very pricey system. Purple token people will just have to log in one day, orange token people the next, green token people the day after, and if they miss their slot, then they'll just have to boot up the Nintendo Today app and see, there's another purple token day on the 17th, another green token day on the 22nd, and so on. This seems fairer than a lottery system which they've used in the past when dealing with heavily rationed consoles, and it still adopts the same underlying principles of opening sales for fixed windows of time and trying to manage the supply provision. If they do ask people to register interest, they will of course have to disclose the price. Here is the dilemma though. They will definitely want to delay the reveal of the price for as long as possible so that they know the absolute most about the market conditions when they take the plunge, but they will also need to start taking pre-orders, and the price will inevitably start to leak anyway if they push it too late, and then the news cycle will be out of their control. So I do expect them to announce the price in this direct, or if they don't, to have the reveal of the price only a week or so later, perhaps when pre-orders on Nintendo's online store go live. I have delved into price extensively before, but suffice to say that, inflation adjusted, $400 is about in line with most past Nintendo systems. Furukawa's recent statements in the investor Q&A indicated that they were inclined to keep the costs low. One option is to have a lower price $400 model, but possibly a version for $450 with better internal storage and perhaps some other subtle improvements, or indeed pack in special features from a Mario branded mouse to specific bolt-ons to NSO extension membership. However, given that they will probably introduce a lower cost model in the next 2 or 3 years anyway in the form of a Switch 2 Lite, I'm not sure they will want the brand confusion of having two on the market, and this might make it more tempting to take the plunge and price at $450. At this point in my mind, and frankly quite possibly Nintendo's, the $450 dilemma feels 50-50. If you're going to price aggressively, it is better to make that choice early. On the other hand, if the price is $450, I think that they will show a lot more first-party stuff as a consequence because they will want to smother out any negative reception. On balance, I think they'll stick with 400, but look to upsell people on the many potential add-ons and subscriptions that will be included as part of Nintendo's overall strategy for the first few years. Then let's get on to third parties. Now, Kit and Krista have a recent video diving into third parties, and to be honest, I barely keep up with first party titles, let alone third parties. One of the perverse consequences of running a gaming YouTube channel on the side is that it eats into the time that you would normally be playing video games, although, to be honest, I was always far more into Nintendo first party content than the majority of third party offerings I've tried. Suffice to say, I do think that they will go to town with a heavy showing of third-party games. The January 2017 Switch launch took pains to showcase those third parties such as Sega who were turning up to the Switch. They can announce that this is truly a new generation technologically is to boast about the major games that are running on the system in year one. The specific balance I'm not sure about, but I think they would want to show some love to most major companies, if only because there's a prestige for those organizations of having premier games featured in such a big corporate event, and it's going to build bridges and build respect and trust. One game we surely know has to come is essentially a tech demo title for the Switch 2's mouse mode, and it's possible that we could get more than one. After all, the original Switch had ARM showcasing the split Joy-Con, snipper clips showing co-op, and 1-2-Switch utilizing Rumble. The question is, are there going to be multiple games that use mouse mode? Metroid Prime 4 definitely seems like it could utilize it. I have a separate video where I discuss potential utilizations in Pokemon Legends ZA, Star Fox, and even a new Ice Climber title. But Occam's razor should tell us that the most obvious solution may be the best, and I think a successor to Mario Paint feels like a perfect launch title. Now, I don't expect it to use the Mario Paint branding per se. A decade ago, Nintendo used Mario Paint as the jump-off point to design a new, creativity-focused Mario experience, and what they ended up with was Mario Maker. Super Mario Maker 2 was no slouch in the sales department and may have even crept into the 10 million bracket by now, but there was definitely a whiff of the underwhelming about it, given how huge a success the Wii U version had been, at least by the standards of the Wii U. However, I think there is potential for a game that incorporates some Maker elements as part of a broader experience. At minimum, you can imagine two-player drawing using two mice, or more, to collaborate on some huge masterwork, perhaps to particular requirements. But 3D modeling should also be possible. Minecraft is huge everywhere, but in particular for the Switch in Japan, so some kind of block-based toolkit to design locations, a sort of digital Lego, could be very enticing. And of course, all this is no fun if you can't create characters and set them off on adventures in games or animations. Yet again, I could see Nintendo reaching into its existing toolkits for this. They tried a game maker mode in Labo, cannibalized it into Game Builder Garage, but I could see them easily taking what they learned there and trying another tilt with the ability to make levels and games and animations. Now, this doesn't have to be a Mario game, but given how successful Nintendo has historically been with sticking Mario's face on everything that moves, and given how big the year is about to become for Mario, with the 40th anniversary around the corner, my hunch is that a drawing meets 3D modeling meets game designing meets perhaps music making title would be far better off with Mario in the lead, shamelessly gamifying elements which could otherwise be cumbersome or fiddly. The great advantage of having a big original title like, let's call it, Mario Studio, is that there's space alongside it for a quite different game title to complement it, specifically Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. The Metroid paradox, apart from being a great name for a future game, has always been that Metroid Prime 4 is in many respects a perfect launch title for a new system. It would benefit from the prestige hugely, even is from a franchise with some form in launching new systems, and yet simultaneously is unlikely to be an air quotes big enough title for the day one slot. But as the Twilight Princess to a Wii Sports style effort, that I could see being a particularly strong proposition. It also makes sense of the schedule we have. Switch 2 may launch in May, but June still seems a lot more likely, especially with so many events opening in May, including the theme park. But would Nintendo really go the whole of April to June's quarter without a Switch 1 game, which, unless they shadow drop a casual title or give us Metroid Prime 4 in that slot anyway, there's no hint that they'll do? I rather doubt it. However, if Metroid Prime 4 launches in June, then they have a game for this quarter locked down. There will almost certainly be some kind of 40th anniversary themed Mario title in September, and they have Pokemon Legends ZA and two 2026 games to hold the Switch 1 fort while they focus in on new games. Now, they generally like to have more than one experience to show off the unique aspects of their systems. DS had Nintendogs, but it also had Brain Age and WarioWare Touched, and Kirby Canvas Curse early on. Both series have to be reasonable shots, and it wouldn't astonish me if rather than Planet Robobot being the Kirby port of choice, it is Canvas Curse. Still, these aren't what I could consider launch day titles. You could easily drop a Kirby announcement onto the Nintendo Today app, and it would be worth a good few days of additional hype, and I would expect this to be one of the ways that they use the app. In this sense, they really can hold back on sharing too much else, and so I expect them to be tactical about the kinds of experiences they show. As I discussed in a separate video, a new Star Fox is risky after the mixed reception of the last one. This sort of title feels like one that they would want to announce and release in very short order, and probably once the system is a bit more established. I could see a mouse mode Star Fox being the kind of game where they just shadow drop a demo out of nowhere and promote it heavily on the Nintendo Today app, so that people don't have the time to read up on all the ways previous Star Fox control systems have been suboptimal, and just experience what the game is actually like. That clearly can't happen until the system is actually released. Still, another launch IP, perhaps a more gameplay-oriented one like ARMS as opposed to a casual painting studio title, does seem plausible to launch early on. I don't have any particular thoughts as to what this would be, except that I think it will be more ARMS than Splatoon, i.e., it will start out as a showcase for the tech rather than being a showcase for a different gameplay experience primarily. If they had a new Splatoon, Animal Crossing, or Pikmin style game, and I do think at least one such title is coming in due course on the Switch 2, then I think they might be tempted to save that for its own presentation where it could gain a bit more publicity. So potentially, and these are illustrations of the general vibe rather than specific predictions, but potentially we could have Mario Studio and Metroid Prime 4 launching at the beginning of June with the console. Mario Kart may never have launched a console, but it's usually not trailing far behind, and an end of June or July slot would match the rhythm of the original Switch, where Mario Kart 8 Deluxe was the first post-launch title. I certainly can't see the game taking much longer than that. Some have said that the trailer game is always the launch game, but if they do have a Mario Studio type experience or any original Wii Sports style endeavour, then it's only natural that they would keep this under wraps. Therefore, I am cooling considerably on the likelihood of a day one Mario Kart personally. Now, what else does Nintendo need to show? I mean, I know we want them to show every game under the sun, but actually, this is going to be a huge presentation with a lot to digest for weeks to come, and even if the only new game they show is a Mario Studio title, an original tech demo style IP, some Mario Kart, and a bunch of third party stuff, well, I'm not saying that these will be the only first party revelations, but I think these could well be, and I think these would still be incredibly exciting. And this all comes back to Nintendo Today. All they need to say is there will be further games revealed on Nintendo Today in the coming months, and people will go equally as wild as if they'd actually dropped a game reveal there and then. They could even sweeten the deal by teasing the nature of the announcements. What if they showed a few series logos on screen first? I don't mean an E3 2017 style Metroid Prime logo, although that could work as well. I literally mean the series logos in the style that they appear in Super Smash Bros. For, let's say, Mario, Zelda, Splatoon, and Kirby. Effectively, this could be 3, 4, 5 game reveals at once, but they wouldn't be committed to actually revealing anything specific for potentially months. Even if they don't do this with actual games, expect reveals to veer towards the short side. For Mario Kart, they will certainly have a massive blowout before the summer, but I could also see this being a perfect Nintendo Today game with regular updates on new characters, new locations, especially if, and I'm sorry to do this, but I think it's likely, we get some other Nintendo franchises showing up to join the likes of the Inklings and the Villagers. Now, if there's one game that surely they have to reveal, it is the next 3D Mario. And I do expect this to happen, but I would bet on it being the one more thing and being an extremely opaque revelation. Mario is going to get a huge push before next April, but its time to really go all out probably isn't quite yet. The full reveal of the new Mario game to me could easily stand as its own major event, and I think there's likely enough to show in the Switch 2 presentation as it stands that they probably don't need to gild the lily. It's possible we might not even be given a year. My expectation is that they will want it out in October 2025, but there is a chance that they decide the game will be better positioned in March 2026 to slipstream its way into the hype cycle for the next movie. Of course, if they go down this more parsimonious route, revealing Mario Studio and Metroid Prime 4 for early June, Mario Kart for late June, and an original IP for July, that would still leave a lot of space in their calendar. Dropping news of Kirby Canvas Curse and Fire Emblem 4 remakes on Nintendo Today in the next few weeks would flesh up the lineup a bit, but surely not by that much. But this is where we get the next Nintendo Direct. Nintendo did an April General Direct in 2017, but to be honest, they were so scrambling for games at this point that they didn't have an awful lot of new stuff to show. I would expect a late June or July Direct this time to map out the rest of the financial year more fully, probably 1 to 2 weeks after the system actually launches, or perhaps the same amount of time after Mario Kart, as they frequently like to do these presentations after big title launches. See this last presentation after Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition, which may not be a huge game in the scheme of things, but is the premier game of 2025 so far, or of course the 2020 presentation after Animal Crossing New Horizons, albeit that was probably affected by global circumstances. Now, I don't think they will likely pre-announce this Direct like they did with the April one, but it's possible they will. More likely, they will just say that you need to keep tracks on Nintendo Today's app in order to see future revelations. In short, I just don't think Nintendo needs this to be such a massive first-party blowout, although I think they will have some major games. The 3 games that they're already announcing, plus 2 original system-specific titles, plus a tease for the next Mario alongside some huge third-party content and a decent amount of time explicating the system's new features, that feels like it would be a satisfying amount of content while keeping their powder dry for a later point. Now, that's not to say that they won't have more, and they do tend, with their bigger titles, to like to have a longer build-up, over a year in some cases. They could just throw caution to the wind and announce Splatoon, Smash and more. I just don't think that they urgently need to do so. But to be honest, at this point, I am just incredibly excited to see what Nintendo are finally serving up. I hope everybody enjoys the Direct. Thank you so much for watching, thank you to my Patreon supporters, and I shall see you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.